Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
It was the equivalent of a football team enjoying a victory parade on an open-top bus in front of the fans. David Cameron's speech to the Conservative Party conference. It was bound to be like that. This was his first big address to the party since winning the election. But it was also a whole lot more than that. It was a carefully calibrated speech that positioned the PM towards the political centre rather than the radical right. Some think they've seen various different David Camerons over the years. Is this the real one? Here's Allegra.
Right now, the Conservatives look like the only party still standing.
Oh, hello. How are you?
They think Labour vanquished, UKIP beaten back, Lib Dems a crumbled ruin. They've waited, and now 2015 is their moment.
After the election, the Tories' campaign guru Linton Crosby told a private group of ministers, "You may have won the election, but you didn't win the arguments." His point was that people voted for Conservative because they were scared of Nicola Sturgeon rather than they loved the Conservative Party. So with this conference, what they've been trying to do is make those arguments for 2020 so people vote for them out of a sense of excitement. And that's what David Cameron's doing in this speech now.
But just what is Cameronism? Well, today, very socially liberal.
Do you know that in our country today, even if you have exactly the same qualifications, people with white-sounding names are nearly twice as likely to get callbacks for jobs than people with ethnic-sounding names? This is a true story. One young black girl had to change her name to Elizabeth before she got any interviews at all. This, in 21st century Britain, is disgraceful.
David Cameron there getting a clap for talking about equality, for talking about racial discrimination. These are not issues he's talked about from the central podium before. Anybody who thought that the election of Jeremy Corbyn to Labour leader would drive this party to the right with this speech has been proved wrong.
But today's Cameronism is hardline too. Deep cuts to the welfare state, and today a robust cultural message.
We've passed the laws, and now I want them enforced. People who organised forced marriages, I want them prosecuted. Parents who take their children for FGM, I want them arrested. And as we do that, we shouldn't just be saying what's wrong with these practices. We should be saying what's right with Britain. Freedom, democracy, equality. These are precious.
David Cameron has always been a hybrid politician, traditional and modern. But today I detected more of a sway to the centre-left than right. He promised an assault on poverty, boosting equality, and to deal with discrimination. Back to early David Cameron, compassionate conservatism before he worried about UKIP and shuffled off to the right.
Bernard Harris from Leicester, he wrote to me before polling day and he said this: "Aged 82, this is possibly my last election. In my life, I foolishly voted Labour, believing it served the working class. How wrong I was. Labour is against all I aspire to. I am 100% for a united kingdom, a sound economy, free enterprise, a trading Europe, and a decent standard of living. Only a Conservative government would achieve this." Well, Bernard, you found the right party, and I want many more to follow in your footsteps.
That was a greedy speech. New groups of voters out of rounds for the Prime Minister. Yes, he's running the Conservative Party, but in the last hour it sounds like he'd like a pop at running Labour too.
So what was the strategy? Well, if it did lean a little more to the left, that may have been to tackle entrenched public opinion. The Prime Minister is on the right.
And he's aiming for that big middle ground of the electorate. He's only got a 12-seat majority at the moment. He wants a much bigger one in 2020. And his challenge is that at the moment, only 13% of people think he occupies the centre ground. 60% think he's right-wing. And so now, with a majority, he can start to make a change there and start to talk more about equality, aspiration, social justice, all of those things that he used to talk about before he got nasty.
The speech was peppered with popular references to help the PM connect, something he needs to work at.
Some people compare Cameron with a a Reagan or Bobby Kennedy. I think that's an exaggeration. Cameron is not loved by the British people. He's not a great popular figure. They find him quite comforting. They don't dislike him. They regard him as out of touch, but actually competent. His approval ratings are just a tiny bit in the positive zone. Now that's good, but he's not a great populist. So what I think he's achieved is something that is more like a young Macmillan, if you like, somebody who comforts people. He doesn't frighten the horses.
They're packing up Conservative conference moments after the Prime Minister's made his speech, and we're told it's the speech he's always wanted to give. But can a compassionate Conservative Party really be cutting tax credits back as quickly as they are? And can a truly modern Conservative Party really be about to be torn apart by the issue of Europe? The Prime Minister has taken 5 years to make this speech. He's got another 5 years to prove to people it's genuine.
Right, so you've heard Allegra. We've had the main party conferences now, and at this point we're accustomed to having a pontificating panel of pundits. But because there's been a lot of political repositioning going on, we thought it might be helpful today to have a map of the political landscape. Well, with me are Polly Toynbee from The Guardian, Phil Collins, former speechwriter to Tony Blair, and Tim Montgomery, a Conservative columnist from The Times. Before we get their views, let me just explain the grid here. We have right and left, small state, large state, left on the left, right on the right. Then we have another scale, socially conservative, socially liberal, and then I'm going to place some rosettes just to get you started. So Fidel Castro, he's an authoritarian kind of guy, but very left-wing. He goes there. Margaret Thatcher, I think we can say, is socially conservative and to the right. Tony Blair, pretty central, really, I guess, a little bit to the left, we'll say. And we've got Donald Trump for no reason I can explain. No idea where he goes, but let's just pop him there because, well, he's sliding as we speak. Right. So we want to hear your views. Tim Montgomery, we've got a Corbyn and we've got a Cameron. You're going to place them first and tell us why.
Well, first of all, I'd probably have Tony have him a little bit closer to Phil than me in terms of the Blairite, but maybe I should play the game first of all. In a way, I'd put him towards the right because he's trying to make the state smaller. But if you look at the kind of state he's creating, it's a state where the NHS and pensions are growing, aid budget is growing, and defence and things like the police are. So you could say that he could be on that side. So I'm going to put him just a little bit to the right on that right-left scale. And then on socially liberal, socially conservative, he supports gay marriage. Yeah. So that moves him towards the liberal side. But he also supports recognising marriage in the tax system. So you could put him there. Okay. So he wants to control immigration, so he's up there, but he hasn't actually delivered. So I'd just put him a little bit down like that. Yeah, you moved Tony Blair. Stop it. Sorry. Okay. Corbyn's much easier. I think he's definitely a big tax, high spending sort of politician, so he's clearly on that side. Okay. And pretty socially you've got him almost as far as Castro to the left, but not quite. OK, actually the Castro and the Corbyn look almost alike, actually. But come on, Phil, where would you put the Blair and Corbyn?
Blair and Corbyn.
Cameron and Corbyn.
I put Blair right on the middle, actually. Yeah. Well, let's do Corbyn first. I want to move him a little bit closer to Castro than Tim has got him, because actually I agree he's very left-wing, but I think one of the aspects of being quite left-wing is the slightly illiberal sense that people are not very good at running their own lives. And I think that you see that in his nationalisation programme. So I want to move him. I think he's a bit more conservative than sort of authoritarian conservative. A slight authoritarian,
I know what you mean.
Left of centre position. Cameron, I want to shift a bit to the right. I don't think we can have the kind of austerity and deficit programme we've had in the first term of Conservative government and allow David Cameron to be just to the right of centre. I think I'm going to shift him over quite a long way. I agree it's quite hard to place on this other dimension, so I'll shift him up onto the axis there, but I want him further over to the right. OK, I understand that. OK, Polly, I'm really interested to see where you're going to put these folks.
You're suggesting that Corbyn is some kind of communist. That's absurd. His policies to, renationalise rail is about as far as it goes. It's not ludicrously extreme. It's not that different to Ed Miliband. I would have put him a bit on left too, actually. I would put him absolutely to the right of Thatcher. For this reason...
Right of Thatcher. And more right-wing than Jeremy Corbyn is left-wing on your scale, actually.
Yes, I would, because his plan is to reduce the state to 35% of GDP, which is smaller than the United States. It's much smaller than anything she dared do. She privatised nationalised industries. He's privatising the state itself. I would make him a bit more socially liberal, because I think he is. I don't think he's much interested in moralising on the whole, but slightly to the right of Thatcher.
Well to the right.
And the talk today was all sham. I mean, it's what people do, it's the money they spend that really shows who they are. And we know where he's going to spend, 12 billion of welfare cuts, enormous further
Because
state
you've raised
cuts.
a very interesting there, because actually you're saying his words were sort of somewhere over here.
Oh, yes, his
But
words
his
were
actual
up
actions
here.
are over here.
Yes.
I wonder, Tim, is that true? Do you think his actions are more off-centre than his...
Well, I
than
think
his
it goes
rhetoric?
the other way, in a way, to the reverse position that Polly describes, because his rhetoric on the deficit is very conservative, very right-wing, if you like, but borrowing about 100 billion a year, year after year, which is what George Osborne and David Cameron has done. Now, this is Keynesianism, deficit expansion. So, yes, he is cutting, but he's cutting defence, he's cutting police. He's actually spending on the kind of things that Polly would probably like him to be spending on.
Are we learning that this guy is an absolute genius, because he's very hard to place anywhere on this map,
Well,
and so he's a little bit or a little
I
bit...
do think that's an important political point. I mean, that maybe the politics is kind of explained for you right there, because the person in the middle is the one who wins all the elections. And I do think there's another thing about David Cameron, which is you, as a Prime Minister, you're also the sum total of the ministers that you license as well. So on prisons, for example, which I thought was the best part of the speech, if he gives Michael Gove his head and he does that prison reform, that would be a really fine thing. Whether or not David Cameron gets out of bed inspired by that sort of doesn't matter if that's what his government does. So I think we've got to give him, for the moment, a little bit of the benefit of the doubt, but there's an awful lot to discover about whether it actually happens.
It was the only Liberal thing that was there, and it was there for the good reason that you need to cut the budget, the Justice Department budget being savagely cut, and he's quite right. The one really good cut is the insane amount of money that we spend on prisons doing nobody any good, and Gove has made very good speeches on that.
Phil just made an interesting point. Phil basically said the voters are kind of here, right? Tim, how far can you move the voters off? It's Tim Polly.
I'm not sure I agree with that. I think the voters are very left-wing on some things, like renationalisation of railways, spending on the National Health Service, but then they're very right-wing on issues like immigration
But Tim,
and
that's an average
tax.
point.
Yeah,
Of course. I'm not saying that's untrue.
That's why the centre ground is such a misleading expression. Keith Joseph, Margaret Thatcher's guru, used to talk about the common ground.
Well,
and
so
that's
does David Cameron.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's more important than I think than trying to find this illusory middle ground.
Polly, how far left do you think the voters can be persuaded? Can they go that far, do you think?
It's very hard to know, because it depends so much on who's selling the story. You kind of feel that Blair could have sold almost anything. In some ways, that's what's frustrating about his era, in that he always worried that the country was much more conservative. Interestingly, Cameron seems to be worried that the country is much more social democratic. So he has to pretend to be a social
Blair's
democrat.
achievement, isn't it, Polly? That's precisely Blair's achievement. That centre point has shifted to the left during the years of Labour government. And that Cameron's speech today was an achievement of Blair's. He would not have made that speech if there hadn't been 10 years of Labour government moving that axis to the left.
I think that's probably true.
We'll leave it there. Thank you all very much.
I've been getting away with it all my